So after checking out biological farming with Flip Nell in the far north of South Africa, we cut across Botswana to Namibia, where we were going to be checking out free-range beef. And there we did everything in reverse. I mean, I say that, we were there to check out free-range beef, but we started on feedlots. The manager of the feedlot told me probably the saddest story I've ever heard when it comes to the animals that we eat. And he said the worst cow that comes into a feedlot is the one that's been hand-reared by a family. And you must think about this. One that's been bottle-fed, one that understands attention, which is no different to having a dog or a cat. And for the 3 months that this animal is being fattened up for slaughter, it craves attention from humans, unaware of its fate. That's when it sinks in that these cattle are alive. And then from feedlots we went to an abattoir, because if you're going to eat meat, you must know how it's slaughtered. And the first time we went there, we missed the last animal to be slaughtered. So we saw sort of the slaughtering process from cutting up a carcass point of view. And I mean, literally it comes in as a whole animal on one side and leaves on the other side as one solid bone. You know, that's all that's left of the cow. So we said, well, we'll come back on our way out of Namibia. And I want you to remember that, because when we left Namibia, it was probably one of the most traumatic experiences of my life. And then we went and checked out free-range cattle, and that's what you imagine in your mind, you know, an animal that ranges free, that comes in for water, and then wanders off into the great surrounds to get fat so that we can slaughter it. That's free-range. The morning we left Namibia, we went back to the abattoir to see the slaughter of the cows. And I was still trying to figure out what it was. You know, up at that point, I'd seen chicken slaughtered, lamb slaughtered in front of me. A cow was something else. I don't know how to explain that. And after Namibia and free-range cattle, we went down to the farm Bissiesfontein in the Namakwa land of South Africa. And we were going there to kind of remove ourselves from the grid. And here we are off the grid. No cell phones, no telephones, no electricity. You get the idea. Where life is closer to how it was 100, 200, 300 years ago. And we were going to be staying with the Poor family. And they're 7th generation farmers that have been in that area since 1820 something. And it was amazing, you know. And I got taught how to make butter. And just think about this, how many of you actually know how to make butter? Or your own potato bread, or your own soap. And these are all things that I was taught while I was there.
Maar ek wonder hoeveel ander dinge jy kan vir my leer om te doen.
Baie, maar dan moet ons baie tyd hê.
How our societies were built up 100 years ago was that we could rely on our families. And a lot of our knowledge came from our families. So when we were learning how to cook, invariably we were learning from our mothers and our grandmothers' skirts. That's how it happened. But it's not happening like that anymore. And we forget how to cook, and we forget all the important things in our lives. And I think it was, well, sitting on top of a rock behind Christian's house, looking out over his land, that I kind of thought, I could belong here. So after 3 or 4 days on the Poor farm, we said our goodbyes and left one 7th generation group of farmers for another, for John Berg in Clanwilliam, where we were going to be checking out the humble potato. This is where I started realizing that farmers are custodians of the land. And to understand that, you've got to multiply out the generations. Let's just say the average generation lives to be 50 years old. Take 7 generations, means that collectively there's 350 years of labor invested. And just think about it, how many 7th generation teachers do you know, or 7th generation plumbers, attorneys, writers? It's not the same kind of talent, This is a talent that's passed from a father to a son. And that's what makes farmers custodians of the land, They have this vested interest in a piece of ground that supports their family and their family's family to come all the way down the generations. What I was beginning to understand, though, that at every farm I went to, there was a hospitality beyond anything I'd ever experienced in the city. Most of us don't even know our neighbours' names. That's it. We don't borrow a cup of sugar anymore. We don't really have our neighbours' best interests at heart when we live these insular lives. But when you're out in rural communities, you see how much more they mesh together, how they're connected. So after Clanwilliam, we travelled to Prince Alfred Hamlet, just out of Ceres, where we were going to be hooking up with Robert Graaf. Check out probably the largest fruit-producing region in South Africa. And that's where I began to understand the business of farming. What would this be worth in here?
Probably in 20 and 30 million rand.
What?
Yeah, that's about this time of the year.
Yeah, you must have brass balls.
If a farmer can produce or farm an item and make a small profit, he'll do it. So basically it means we have to ask for that item. And I'll give you an example. If we want a free-range organic chicken and a farmer can make a small profit by producing it, he'll do it. What we've got to understand is that quality costs more. So you can buy a cheap bird for 30 rand, 25 rand, and not know what's in it and know that it's probably had an unpleasant life. And then when it gets slaughtered, it's got all that other stuff in it, and then you eat it. Or you can pay more for an item that is produced ethically, that has all the good stuff in it, and eat it less often. And that's what I realized when I was in Ceres. Here I met a group of young farmers, and across the board from sort of 35 upwards, younger, the farm managers were younger, who were in the business of farming. And that's what they did. They were there to make a living for themselves by working the land. And when I say working the land, just understand, no farmer wants to ruin his land, and they're all custodians of that land. The most incredible people I've met in South Africa come from farming stock.
Really?
Yeah, and I'll put you in there as well. So after the business of farming in the Ceres Valley, we cut across to Franschhoek, where I was going to be meeting up with a winemaker who was like a leopard changing his spots. Pietie was an old school farmer who had spent his whole life farming with chemical fertilizers, pesticides. But while he was on Limart, he started seeing the same thing that Flip saw. His yields were going down, quality of the fruit wasn't as good, and the land was dead. So he went organic.
When you change over to organic, you have to start putting back into the soil. You cannot do it just to say you farm organic. You must totally believe in it. And you can see very clearly the difference now after 3 years.
Very few people have an opportunity in their life to make a difference.
Yeah.
And
you have that opportunity on this farm and in this area.
You could see how the earth was coming back to life. And for a man who had spent so long in his life working one way to change to another was amazing. After the front trip, we went back to the sea, to the ocean. We stayed in a place called the Beach Camp, the Cape Columbine Nature Reserve, which is just out of Paternoster. And it's a very sad story on the West Coast because traditionally these families have supported themselves off the ocean's bounty. When there were snook runs, they caught lots of snook. They had to figure out ways to dry them, to fleck them, to smoke them, whatever, to provide for times when there were no snook. When there were harders, they figured out how to cook them, dry them, eat them, and keep them for times when there were no harders. And the same with crayfish. And you've got to think about the West Coast. When the ocean provides your living, provides your livelihood, as a subsistence fisherman, you go out when the weather's good and when you can. And I went out on what they call a crayfish bakkie, which is a tiny boat. And when you're bobbing around out at sea in one of these boats trying to earn your living, you already have the odds stacked against you. Now add legislation to it and then try and provide for your family.
Ek wil nie iemand moet my kreef vang en ek sit by die huis en ek wil self my kreef vang. Dit is wat ek wil doen. Dit is my lewe. Kyk vir my om ryk te wees as ek wil nie ryk wees nie. Ek wil net omdat ek 'n visserman is my regmatige deel uit die see uitkry. Dis al wat ek wil hê.
Ja. 'n lewe vir jouself maak.
Ek wil vir my vroutjie en my kinders 'n goeie lewe gee. Dis al.
And when you couple with that with legislation that's trying to protect the oceans without clear communication between those that are doing the legislation or creating the legislation and the people on the ground, you have a car crash. And the sad thing about the West Coast is that that car crash is people's lives. For our last stop, we left Paternoster and travelled down to Pringle Bay. And Gareth was going to take us out to sea twice. The first time to catch tuna, the second time, we didn't know it then, but to catch snook. You think tuna, you had a little sashimi roll or a little bit of sushi. You don't think like 80 kilos of designed to be in the ocean and to cruise like a missile. You don't. But that's what they do. And when you hook one and it takes off,
Yeah, I got another one.
and you have this battle with the fish.
This is real hunting, you know, this is one-on-one.
You eventually get it to the side of the boat, and what do? We cut a piece out the top of the head and shove a steel spike down its spine to kill it instantly so that the meat's good so that we can eat it. And then you stab it under the one gill here, one fin, so that you bleed it immediately. But the nice thing about it was that it was me fighting the fish. And as a result, I ate that fish. On the second day, we went snook fishing, and let me tell you, I've spent my whole life fishing. Trout, hand lines, you name it, I've virtually done it. I mean, I just caught a tuna, 50, 60 kilo tuna. But snook fishing is primal. It's a hand line, and it's a fish that's known otherwise as a snake mackerel. And when you pull one of these things onto the boat and it's slapping around like this and the teeth are going, you shit yourself. There is no other way to describe it, and it's completely exhilarating.
Got teeth like I haven't seen before, and the minute you pull him onto the boat, he wants to eat you.
Not called a crocodile
Yeah,
for nothing.
crocodile for nothing. Eh?
And in my mind, I realized right then that if you're going to eat meat, and in this case fish, this is exactly how it should be done. You should catch your fish, you should break its neck, and you should eat it. That's the respect you're showing for an animal. That's a one-on-one battle. And in many respects, it was more of an epiphany for me than anything I'd done on the whole trip. That's what food should be about, one-on-one. because then you know exactly where it comes from and what's gone into it. Now, I've been back in Cape Town for a couple of weeks, and I've had some time to digest everything that I learnt while we were on the road, on this trip, to find out where my food comes from. And out of it, I realized that there's only one question that you actually have to ask when it comes to your food world. And it's this simple. Where does my food come from? Because inherent in that question are all the answers you should want to hear. It should tell you whether your food has been ethically produced, is from sustainable resources. It should tell you if there's anything in there that you want to know about, whether it's got antibiotics in it or growth promoters. Because then it allows you to make an educated decision about your food. And it empowers everyone. Where does my food come from? And if whoever you buy your food from can't answer that question to your satisfaction, just buy your food somewhere else.